Hi, I'm James Bruce from MakeUseOf.com, and today I wanted to take a look back at which headset is best, which we originally looked at about a year ago when they were both first released, but lots of things have changed since then, so I thought it might be worth revisiting 1 year on. Now, before I do that, I'd like to qualify myself. I am an original Kickstarter backer of the Oculus Rift DK1, which I still have here. I also bought into the DK2. I had a pair of Razer Hydra controllers, which I've since sold, and I received my Oculus Rift Consumer Edition free by nature of being an original backer of the DK1 Kickstarter. I bought the Vive with my own money, but I also bought the Oculus Touch controllers and extra cameras and those sort of accessories with my own money. They weren't comped or given to us or expensed for the purposes of a review, so I just want to make that clear. Oh, and I also plowed $300 into the Kickstarter disaster that's known as 6 cent STEM. Still holding out hope for that one, guys. I wanted to tell you this because a VR system does cost a lot of money. That anyone who throws money at one system over another is going to be extremely biased. It's purely to justify their own expenditure. So I wanted to tell you that I am about as unbiased a source as you are going to find, given that I've sunk money into both systems, all the VR things. I don't hate Facebook, I don't hate Palmer Luckey, and I don't have some moral crusade to go on against exclusivity of games on either system. All I want is awesome VR. So now that that's out of the way, let's move on. So firstly, I think we have to address cost, because at the start of 2017, both systems cost roughly the same. Once you factored in the touch controllers and an extra camera, if anything, Oculus was a little bit more expensive, but basically the same cost. However, Oculus has recently reduced the price of entry for both the Rift headset and the package that comes with the touch controllers by about $200, such that you can get the headset and controllers for about $600 now, compared to $800, $900 for the HTC Vive. The Vive, however, hasn't yet received a price cut. It remains the same price as it was when it was launched. So the upshot is that currently the Oculus Rift is about $200–300 cheaper. So the headsets themselves haven't actually changed much since launch. The Vive is apparently a little bit lighter now. It's about the same as the Oculus Rift. So since that hasn't changed much, I don't think it's worth discussing at length, but briefly, let's go over the differences between the two headsets. The Oculus Rift has some really rather good built-in headphones. The Vive doesn't. The strap on the Vive is a sort of material which pulls it onto your face more, while on the Oculus Rift, it has more of a rigid head strap which cups the back of your skull. Most people say that they prefer the comfort of the Oculus Rift in terms of wearing it for a longer period of time. Two exceptions to that though. I find that the Oculus Rift tends to fog up more quickly, presumably it runs hotter than the Vive, and also if you have glasses like my wife and I do, then they do tend to get caught up inside of the Rift, whereas they don't in the Vive. I can take this off without pulling off my glasses. On the visual side, the Oculus Rift has a slight edge there. I prefer it for Sims and spaceflight, that sort of thing, just because I need that extra bit of visual clarity sort of in the central area. The Vive, on the other hand, has a slightly bigger field of view, which tends to lend itself better to room scale games where you are constantly moving around, rather than focusing on one particular area in front of your eyes. Both headsets have visual artifacts introduced by their custom Fresnel lenses. On the HTC Vive, that appears as concentric rings coming out from the center. On the Oculus Rift, these are more well known as God rays, as white lines whenever you look at something bright. In the end though, they're both pretty similar. Neither really has the edge over the other. They're both pretty good. They both look awesome. They both have problems. There's not that much difference between the headsets. The only thing I would say is that the cable on the Oculus Rift is a good couple of feet shorter than the Vive, and this can make all the difference in large play spaces. Alright, on to tracking. Now, while the first few months after the release of the Oculus Touch controllers, tracking on the Oculus side was full of bugs and a little bit sketchy to say the least, things have mostly settled down now. And for small to medium-sized rooms, as long as you have a third camera as well. The Oculus system is pretty much on par with the HTC Vive. However, it is still an enormous faff to get the Oculus system working perfectly. The core of the problem is that Oculus requires USB connections for each camera that you have connected, while the Vive stations require only power. So in most households, you have a power socket on each wall, or at least opposing walls, and it's pretty easy to plug in the base stations in each corner just to the power socket on the wall. The Oculus cameras, on the other hand, will require you to run a USB extension cable around the edge of your room or wherever and back to your PC, which means you also need those extension cables. So there's also a certain USB dance that you need to do with the Oculus cameras. Whether or not your chipset is compatible on your motherboard, you may need to buy an additional controller board. Whether or not there's enough power being supplied by any extensions or USB hubs that you've got plugged in, and whether you've brought compatible extension cables, because they won't all necessarily work. Now, all of these at this point are a series of known facts. If you head on over to Reddit, the community there is fantastic and they will help you get everything set up. There are lists of compatible cables and there are ideal placement camera setups being posted. So you will get it working eventually, but there is still a lot of faffing around to get to that point. The truth is that moving my Oculus PC around or running Windows Update is always a bit annoying, because I'm sure that something is going to break. Either the USB settings are going to be reset, or I'll have to reinstall some drivers or run through the Oculus setup again, and it happens more frequently than I'd like, compared to the Vive, which pretty much just works when I turn it on. So Vive still wins on ease of setup and tracking accuracy in larger play spaces. But if you put in the effort and follow the guides that you'll find on the subreddit, for instance, you will get the Oculus cameras working just as well in small to medium-sized play spaces as you would with the Vive, and you probably won't notice much of a difference at all. So let's talk about controllers, because at this point they both have tracked motion controllers. The Oculus Touch controllers being released 8 months after the main headset. Now, from a technical perspective, the Oculus Touch controllers are a lot better. As well as being smaller, lightweight, more ergonomic, so they fit in your hand better, they also have a series of capacitive buttons on them, meaning that the system actually knows which buttons you are pressing and when, and not just pressing down on the button, but when you just have your finger resting on them. And this gives you a really great representation of your hands in virtual reality. The first time you lift your finger and see your virtual avatar doing the exact same motion is pretty mind-blowing. That said, it doesn't really matter that much at the moment, because there aren't that many games that require finger-perfect object manipulation. Right now, most games and apps are limited to grabbing, pointing, throwing, and waving your controller around. And the Vive's few buttons still represent those just as abstractly as the Oculus Touch does. The only small difference is that while the Vive ones have grip buttons on the side, they're pretty bad and no developers use them. While on the Oculus Touch controller, the grip buttons are quite frequently used along with the trigger. However, I do still find the grip button on the Oculus Touch to be fairly abstract. After all, you do still need to be holding onto the controller with your bottom two fingers while you reach out and grab with that. It's really just tracking two fingers and a thumb. Now, ideally, you'd be able to completely let go of the controller and grab something. And that's actually something we've seen on the Vive 2 prototype controllers at the moment. No one knows if they'll make it to the final stage yet, but that has been demoed. They actually strap onto your hand and then you can completely let go. Otherwise, they pretty much resemble the Oculus Touch controllers, just with a strap on them. So clearly, this sort of design is the way in which things are headed. Now, personal preference is going to play a huge part here. So, warning, controversial opinion here. Despite the fact that the Oculus Touch controllers are more advanced and better at representing your virtual hands, I do still prefer the Vive ones, and that's because they just feel more substantial in my hands. They feel more like I'm holding something, which is typically the sort of games I'm playing, and obviously this is going to depend on the sort of games that you mostly play. So if you prefer adventure games where you are picking up small objects and moving them around and pointing towards things, you're probably going to prefer the Oculus Touch. If you prefer shooting games or RPGs with lots of swordplay in them, you're probably going to prefer the Vive wands. Of course, let's not forget that you can also 3D print a variety of attachments for your controller. Like right here, I have a rifle attachment for one of my Vive controllers to give me more accuracy in shooting games, or this 3D printed gun prop. And I'm pretty sure you can get some for both style of controller. So in the end, that probably doesn't even matter that much either, because you can make your controllers heavier by just slotting them into one of these. It's probably also worth mentioning that only the Oculus Touch is compatible with Rock Band VR. That is an exclusive for the Touch platform. When you buy the Touch controllers, it comes with a little adapter that you can slot onto a guitar, and then it reads the location using your Touch controller. However, by all accounts, the game isn't that great. It's not really a good match for VR, so you can probably forget about that as a deciding factor. It's also worth talking about what's on the horizon. What's coming up in terms of first and third party hardware. First up, HTC is bringing out a deluxe headphone strap for the Vive, and this will bring the design pretty much in parity with the Oculus Rift. So it'll have a rigid back and a pair of decent quality headphones. This will retail at around $100 though. So of course this increases the price difference between the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive just to get the exact same features. Most excitingly, perhaps, there are wireless transmission systems coming, so we'll finally be able to be cable-free. The closest to release is probably the TP-Cast, which comes from the Vive X accelerator program. Now, it's not yet known whether or not this will work with the Oculus Rift. In theory, it should. After all, it's just an HDMI transmitter and wireless dongle. But it's possible, since it was funded under the Vive program, that it will be restricted to the Vive somehow. But even after that, there are other models available that will work with either headset. So cables will be a thing of the past if you're willing to spend $200–300 buying a wireless transmitter. One thing we do know for sure is that the Vive is likely to get more third-party tracked accessories, thanks to the release of their Vive Tracking Puck, a $100 device which pretty much looks like the top of a Vive controller and only provides tracking capabilities. You'll be able to strap this onto a variety of different things, like your cat or a beer cup, and have an arbitrary number of tracked objects inside your VR environment. But again, cost at $100 each, this is likely to limit the uptake of the device to very niche audiences, and to be honest, we don't really know what's coming there. The only one I do know of so far is a Kickstarter for VR Glove, a haptic feedback glove controller. But that's actually going to come with an adapter for either the Vive Tracking Puck or your existing Vive wands or an Oculus Touch controller. And we may find that this is the case for most third-party accessories that eventually get released. However, given the limitation of Oculus's tracking using LEDs and optical cameras, the chances are you won't ever be able to bring more objects into the Oculus system. You'll always be limited to the headset plus two controllers, or two controllers adapted onto another object. Whereas in the Vive, you should in theory be able to bring in an arbitrary number of other things. Additional tracked cats, for instance, as well as your standard controllers. But the chances of you doing this are very slim, so probably there's not really a lot of difference either way. Oh, there is also an HTC Vive eye tracking accessory that's coming out soon, and this is specific to the Vive because of the actual lens shapes, although there's no reason they couldn't make one for the Oculus Rift 2, that just hasn't been announced. It certainly feels like Valve and HTC are opening up the Steam VR system to a lot more devices and third-party integrations compared to Oculus, which tends to do everything in-house. Finally, let's talk about games, because some people would have you believe that this is a very cut and dry, easy decision to make. Oculus Rift has access to all the Oculus exclusives, as well as everything on Steam, while HTC Vive users only get the stuff on Steam and can't access Oculus games. But that's not entirely true. As ever, the truth is somewhere in the middle. In fact, HTC Vive users can access most of the Oculus Home software through the use of the Revive hack. And in fact, Oculus isn't that great on Steam VR. Many users report the core Steam VR interface being a little bit buggy for them. And a lot of the exclusives that Oculus does have tend to be timed exclusives, like the recent Superhot VR, which has been exclusive to Oculus Touch for a long time now, but is also coming out onto Steam very soon. So when you buy the Oculus Touch controllers, you certainly get a lot of cool games on Oculus Home for free. However, the only one which really stands out for me is Robo Recall. And again, Vive owners can still get access to that using the Revive hack. So on the software side, there's nothing in particular which draws me personally to either system. The truth is that there are fantastic short games and experiences on both systems, but neither yet has exclusives for any real in-depth long-form content. Fallout VR is coming, but that's probably going to work on both systems as well. In terms of existing games that work really well in VR, you've got Eve Valkyrie and Elite Dangerous for the space combat sims. You've got Project Cars and Dirt Rally for driving sims. So it's certainly not the case that there aren't any long, in-depth games out there that you can play in VR. There are on both Oculus Rift and HTC Vive. So, which is the best VR system right now? I'm not going to tell you which is the best. The truth is that they're both pretty awesome. And anyone who says either is by far better than the other is really just trying to justify their own expenditure. That said, right now, Oculus Rift is the more budget-friendly system. It's at least $200 cheaper than the HTC Vive, and the tracking should be fine for small to medium-sized play spaces, assuming you buy a third camera as well. Now, this is a fantastic move by Oculus to lower the cost of entry into VR, and I really applaud them for that. That said, if I had to make a choice today, and again, personal opinion warning here, I would choose the HTC Vive. Because you know what? I value my time more than I do $200. The truth is that I only have about half hour in which I can play VR every day, and when that's the case, I just really don't want to spend the time messing around setting up the tracking again because it's broken, or unplugging things and plugging them back in again. I would much rather pay more to save a bit more time setting it up. However, if you put the time in, if you're willing to run through setup again every so often, then your experience with the cheaper Oculus Rift will be just about on par with that which you can get in the HTC Vive, with the caveat that for larger play spaces, the Vive is always going to be the better choice. But again, all of this is going to come down to personal preference. So I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you can afford either system, then please try both before making a decision. You may find that you prefer the comfort of the headset over any other factors. You may prefer one controller over another significantly. Or there may be something else entirely that I haven't even thought about, but which is more important to you. Whichever you choose, just make sure the first thing you do is to download Rec Room, because it's one of the best free and multiplayer cross-platform games that is well populated all the time. There are lots of players. It's available on both Steam VR and Oculus Home. And most of the time you'll find me, Wolfie, shooting my way through the latest quest mode, The Rise of Jumbotron. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit like and comment with your own opinions. And hit subscribe if you'd like to be notified of all our weekly technology tips, tutorials, and gadget giveaways from all of us at MakeUseOf.com. Until next time.